Hey guys, this is your Digital Day 3 lesson. We're moving into scatter plots now, so we finished off with two-way tables. And as you saw from the video from your math short, the idea of scatter plots is basically comparing two different quantities or two different variable informations and seeing how they might have a correlation or some type of association with each other. So we're going to talk right now just about the different kinds of associations. And we're going to first start with our types of variable association. So the variable association is focusing on how does your x value relate to the y value. So it's kind of similar to when we're talking about slope. So you know what positive slope looks like, negative slope, zero slope. That's basically what we're doing, except obviously instead of it being a straight line, you've got these points that are somewhat scattered about, but they're following a general pattern, an idea, because of the relationship that they have against each other. So the first one we're going to focus on is positive association. And with positive association, it looks similar to what a positive slope would look like. Okay, it starts at the bottom left and moves towards the upper right. And how it relates is that when x increases, when your x value is increasing, your y value is also going to increase. And likewise, if your x value is decreasing, your y value is decreasing. So what I mean is if I'm looking at this point right here, this point is when x is a low number and y is a low number. And then if I go to one of these points, this is when x is a high number and y is a higher number. So when x is low, y is low. When x is high, y is high. So that's a positive association. They follow the same pattern, that they both increase or both decrease together. Okay. Negative association. So when we're focusing on a negative association, it's similar to the look of a negative slope. Starts at the top left and works its way down to the bottom right. So they have opposite effects on each other. When x is increasing, the y is decreasing in value. So when x is at a high number over here, your y is at a low number. So your x is at a high value, your y is at a low value. And the same goes for the reverse. When x is at a low number, y is at a high number. So here's where x would be at a low number, and if we look up, y goes up to the high number. Okay? So those are your negative associations, what that looks like. Then you have no association whatsoever. That means there's no pattern. There's no obvious correlation or relationship between those two data points. So it's basically like what a scatter plot would sound like. It's scattered all throughout. You don't see any kind of rise or a decline in the values, no relationship to each other whatsoever. Okay, so those are your variable associations. If we go on to page 53, and again, you guys can pause at any time if you need to. If you feel like you need to take a moment, copy down, then pause the video. You can always rewatch the video as well. So for the next kind of association is what we call linear associations. And so you guys remember linear means that it's a line, a straight line. So when we talked about a linear function, it was a straight line that was graphed. So it's similar here for linear scatter plots. The linear association means that the scatter plot somewhat follows a lined pattern. So whether it's a positive or negative correlation, it is pretty much almost following a line. Then you have nonlinear. Your nonlinear kind of looks like it has a little bit of a curve to it. That would be a nonlinear scatter plot. And it can be both positive, so this would be a positive nonlinear association. This one would be a negative nonlinear association. These ones would be positive linear and negative linear. So you want to make sure you understand linear means it's somewhat straight. Non-linear, it means it has a little bit more of a curve to it. Positive means it's going what would look like an upward direction. Negative would go in a downward direction. And no correlation means there's no real direction. Okay, so let's talk about different real-world examples for positive, negative, and no correlation. So for a positive correlation, I wrote down 3 examples here. We've talked about this one before, the basic idea that if you don't study, you probably won't do well on a test, versus if you do study, the majority of people do better on tests when they do study. So I wrote that down. That's, time spent studying versus the scores that you got on a test. If you spend a low amount of time, chances are you might have a low score. If you have a large amount of time studying, chances are you're going to have a high score. Okay, another one might seem a little off to you, but the amount of time that's passed, years that have passed versus gas prices. So, 1970 versus today, gas prices had a huge change. So 1970, gas prices were probably lower. In 2020, gas prices are obviously higher. And then a more obvious one, as a kid gets older, their weight changes, their height changes. Okay, it's increasing. So think about it. When you're young, when you're first born, a couple days old, you probably came out, you're 10, maybe 8 pounds as your birth weight. Then as you get older, so by your first month, maybe you doubled in weight. So maybe you went from 7 pounds to 14 pounds. And then by the time you're a year old, maybe you're 20 pounds. And by the time you're 2 years old, you're 26 pounds. And so as you age, as a child, your weight is going to increase. Now, obviously, we know that once you get to a certain point, sometimes your weight kind of stops and caps off. We're talking about just as, a child, a basic baby to teenager. Your weight is going to consistently increase as you age. Okay, so those are positive correlations, some examples of positive correlations. Then here we have negative correlations, and I had to throw this one in here because of everything that's going on right now and the whole reason that we're doing digital days. A negative correlation, washing your hands and sickness. So thing that you're hearing constantly from your parents, in the news, from everybody around you, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. So the more often you wash your hands, the less likely you are to get sick, versus the less you wash your hands, the more likely you are to get sick. So they have these opposite effects on each other. One is more and the other is less. So they have that opposite effect. Okay, so food temperature and time spent on the table. So think about it. When you've cooked a meal and you take it off the stove and you put it on the plates and put the plates on the table, the very moment it gets to the table, the temperature is still pretty hot. You might have to blow on your food a little bit to cool it down. So it's a higher temperature when it's first at the table. But as you spend time at the table and you're talking and, you guys are having your family dinner, you're spending more time at the table, the temperature starts to cool down. The temperature gets lower. Okay, so those are opposite effects. The less amount of time at the table, the higher the temperature of the food is. The more time that's spent at the table, the lower the temperature of the food is going to be. Okay, and then this one's just a little bit out there, but it was an example that a student gave last year. The length of your hair versus the amount of shampoo that's left in the bottle. So obviously, if you have more hair, then you're going to have less shampoo left over. So that's left over, not what you use, but what's left over. If you have less hair, you have more shampoo that's left over. So that's just an outside way of thinking. Okay, and then no association whatsoever. I just gave one example, and obviously there's nothing for me to write that this goes up, this goes down, because no association means there's no relationship. The length of your arms and the amount of points scored on a test, they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. So there's no association, no correlation between those two events. So what you're going to be doing now, because the video is done, is you're going to go on to the closing period, which is the discussion board. You are going to post 2 examples, real-world examples of positive correlations, 2 real-world examples of negative correlations, and then 2 real-world examples of no correlation. And once you post those, you are then going to go back and you're going to respond to other people's postings. So you're going to look and respond to somebody else's positive correlation, somebody else's negative correlation, somebody else's no correlation. Now your response might be, oh, hey, that's a really neat example. I like that example. Or maybe you don't agree with their example. Maybe you think that the example they gave for a negative correlation might actually be a positive correlation. So we're going to go through and post on those. Make sure you get those postings done quickly, because I'm going to use a couple of your all's posts, and we're going to use those postings to do some graphing of scatter plots in a couple of days. So happy correlations.